Hey, Tomer, nice to meet
Hey,
you.
you
Let's
too.
get right into it. You said in a previous podcast, in one of your podcasts with somebody else, you said we can't consume what isn't produced. I have a note on my phone. Can you go into that and explain what you meant by that? So again, that quote is you can't consume what isn't produced. And I loved the way that you
Well,
said that.
I mean, it's obvious, and when taken in that context, right? Like, if there isn't a bowl of soup that's made, you can't eat the bowl of soup. So you have to help me out a little bit in just capturing the context in which I made that
Yes.
comment. But presumably, it was uh, something to do with governments promising some things to people that they themselves had not produced.
Yes, that was exactly it. So you were referring to money being produced but not creating anything of value, and
I see.
how how you can't consume what isn't produced, and that's essentially what government debts allow us to do.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the sleight of hand that they try to pull off, right? They try to say, we're going to create new wealth in the nation by printing money. We're going to spend trillions of dollars. Well, spending trillions of dollars that didn't exist doesn't create new products that haven't been produced. And it's quite simple when you actually think about it. We presume that if you have money, you can go out and buy a thing. But let's say that the one supermarket around the corner is everything that's been produced, and somebody prints more money so that you can go and consume more from there. You don't create abundance by printing more money. There's nothing more that's been produced. So, sorry, that's
No
my
worries.
alarm to get ready for this podcast. Um, you can't, if nothing more is produced, more money won't allow more consumption. And that's really the gimmick behind fiat money, right? It's this presumption that because money looks like it can buy something, more money looks like it can buy more, but it can't. Production is what creates the wealth of the nation. Money is what allows us to exchange it between one another. Printing money distorts the justice behind what we produce, and it destroys the incentive to produce. If you are going to get free money without working, without producing anything because of a universal basic income or some kind of airdrop of money, then you're not going to produce anything, and there will be less wealth than if you had produced something. So production is where wealth comes from, right? Not money. Money is a store of value that you're supposed to get in exchange for having produced some wealth, given it to somebody, and then what do they give you in return? Well, if you're not bartering, they're giving you money, right? Or you're bartering money for goods, and then you're able to use your money to buy somebody else's production, right? And that's the way that the world works. And even in the extent of a service economy, in a service economy, you're providing your time and your skill to provide a service. You're producing your service with your time instead of sitting and doing nothing. So this is economic wealth and activity, which is the trading of goods and services that people are prepared to trade their money for, requires production. And at the risk of already starting to repeat myself, the illusion that governments and politicians try to pass off is that they can increase wealth by printing money and producing nothing. And when they produce nothing, they produce no wealth.
So, just tailing off of what you said there, something that confuses me, and I've posted this on Twitter multiple times. If governments don't, if they can just print the money out of thin air, then why do they tax us? Why do they need to ask us for
Well,
our
it's a tradition.
taxes?
It's a long-standing. Remember, they didn't used to be
Exactly.
able to print money out of thin air. They used to
Yeah.
have to collect tax. They used to have to collect gold. So they used to have to tax. And then when and they didn't want to, or didn't realize that they didn't need to anymore, uh, stop taxation when they switched overnight as a surprise to a fiat money. They wanted everyone to think everything was still the same. If they suddenly said, we don't need to tax you anymore, people would say something major has changed. Something really fundamental has changed. And there's lots of reasons, but governments, again, the very act of printing money is so irrational that when you ask why do they do this or why do they do that, it's not for thought out rational reasons. It's usually, well, because we used to do it last week, so we're going to do it this week. We used to do it before, we're doing it now. We need more money. We think we've pushed a limit on how much we can print. Why do you think that? We just do, right? Like there's no explanation. If you watch Q&As with politicians, their answers are hollow or deceptive or pointless. They're rarely thought out. They're rarely reasoned, and they're rarely true.
Yeah, there was what this brings to mind is there was that advisor for the Biden administration. He didn't know exactly how money is printed or
I
how
remember
debt
the
is.
video
Do you
you
remember
talked
that?
about.
I
Yeah,
found
I
that
can't
so
remember
hilarious.
exactly who it was, but it really just goes to show that these people are way out of their depth, right? In
Yeah,
terms of what they know and how they reason about things. And he was so confused. He said, well, we don't really not print the money. And there was a similar one from the
yeah,
European Central Bank and the Norwegian Central Bank. So there's all these clips get confused in my head. But literally what you're seeing in these cases is the people in charge of the money don't understand how the money works. And when they try to answer a question honestly, which is rare, but they sometimes do, they get themselves all caught up in circles and realize that what they're saying doesn't make any sense. And this is the way it's going to be. It's like when a child asks their parents, why do we have to do this? And they say, because I say so,
yeah,
rather than provide a legitimate answer.
yeah, yeah. I completely agree with that. I want to just change the topic a little bit. I watch a lot of your videos, a lot of your content. I love it. I think you go very
Thank
in
you.
depth on very different topics, and they're so widely spread into different parts of the world, different parts of our lives. I like to ask this to a lot of my questions who are deep into the Bitcoin space. What do you think is the most important downstream effect of Bitcoin?
When you say downstream, you mean like what its effect will be on civilization, a society, or?
Society, civilization, how we think of money. So let me give you my example. I
Yeah,
don't want to sway your thinking, but I
yeah.
personally think that Bitcoin is going to demonetize housing, and that's going to have massive
Okay.
impacts on everything. So
Yeah.
what just based like along those lines, like anything that you think?
Yeah, I think it will bring reason and rationality into the economy overwhelmingly, whereas we currently have an economy that's filled with unproductive, irrational games because fiat creates all this distorted thinking and gives all this power to politicians to distort rational judgment. It replaces rational judgment with otherwise irrational deeds, right? Like Keynesianism actually openly states it creates wealth to hire people to dig holes and then pay other people to fill in the holes. And clearly,
Yeah,
there's no wealth created. Nobody's better off. People are tired. They're sweaty, and money has been printed, and no wealth has been created. There's no house. There's no good. There's nothing. There's nothing there. It's pointless economic activity, which is the fundamental theory behind modern fiscal policy, and monetary policy is just as stupid. And so I think by fixing that, we either end up saving tremendous amounts of time in our lives. So we either gain back a lot of time. Well, it's not either or. We both gain back a lot of time, and we become much more productive. We produce what people actually demand rather than we have. I live in Toronto. I don't know where you live, but
I'm in Toronto as well.
yeah, for the last 15 years, the government's been building a subway line along a street named Eglinton Avenue, and nothing's done. And it was supposed to take 10 years. And this was after they had pledged a decade earlier to build a subway line there, that they started and abandoned the project halfway through. This could be done, but with a distortion of politics and the goal being employ people rather than produce a subway, you end up with literally digging a giant hole and filling it back in and then digging it again over the
Yeah,
course of decades with nothing to show for it other than tremendous inconvenience, because the digging of the subway creates enormous traffic problems above ground while it's happening. So we've had like 25 years of a major street cause tremendous inconvenience every day to tens of thousands of people. And we
yeah,
have nothing else to show for it other than tremendous inconvenience and losses of billions of dollars. But economic activity was created, but no value, no wealth was created. Right? We're all poorer for what's been done. So that to me is what gets fixed wholesale when you take the teeth out of politics and fiat money's ability to distort the economy, to without causing bankruptcy and cessation of uneconomic activity, for effort and energy to continue to be poured into irrational and unproductive activity.
Yeah, that actually brings to mind. I don't know if you know my background. I used to work in finance. I used to work as a fixed income analyst. So
Okay.
I would uh, I would help these massive organizations to rebalance their portfolios, because let's say they buy these bonds, and like let's
Yeah.
say it's a pension fund, for example. They need to make a payout. They buy
Yeah.
these bonds and then they have to sell these bonds. So
Right.
the bank that I was working with TD Bank. So the bank that I was working with, they were taking 0.5%, half a percent, 1%, whatever it was. But the portfolios were gaining something like 2%. So they were taking 25% of their profit when they created the problem in the first place, when they created
Right.
the money, the amount of money that's being added to the system.
Mm.
We wouldn't need bonds, we wouldn't need stocks, all this labor, like just continuing off what you said, all this labor, I was wasting my time. I spent 10 years
Yeah,
working.
most of under fiat, the entire finance, like the financialization of banking,
Yeah,
has it becomes all these people pushing numbers, selling derivative products or in
yeah,
synthetic instruments, which don't really make any sense and ought not to exist. But the system itself is just made out of debt, right?
yeah,
Every dollar is an obligation for another dollar, so this with interest. So that's why the money supply essentially needs to grow, because the system is bankrupt without the money supply growing. But the money supply grows a lot faster than it would otherwise need to grow anyway. So the whole thing is just like it has no solid foundation, and all this bizarre economic activity, and individuals with talent get drawn into the finance industry to keep this irrational system working, instead of being drawn towards engineering or other
yeah,
services or things that they're passionate about that actually create medical research, all sorts of things. And so it wastes human lives, right? Like
yeah,
the impact we could have made that would have been useful is all put into maintaining this broken system, which is going to break anyways. And there will be no legacy, there will be no memory, there will be nothing left at the end of it other than a ruined old financial system that didn't make sense, that caused tremendous injustice. So
yeah,
it's a mess, and the fact that the whole free world has gotten itself into it and gone on for 70 years now, with this dilemma, and it's reaching a climax, is the great tragedy of our day.
yeah. And I want to actually go into something that you just said. I love how you explain certain topics. You go very in depth. You teach them from first principles. So you said, what you just said. You said the current system needs interest, needs new money created. Sorry, not needs interest. Needs new money to be created. Needs new
To
debt
pay
to
the
be created.
interest on the old money
To
that was created, which
to
was an obligation. It
exactly.
was created by a bank at an interest rate, right? It was created by the
Yes.
central bank at an interest rate. So they make the money, and they say they're the only ones who are allowed to make the money, and they want back more than what they made. Well,
Yeah.
again, you can't get back more than what you made if you're the only person making it. So what do they? So they have to make more to give it to somebody else. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul, or they're moving money from
Yeah.
one pocket to another. At the end of the day, you're a pocket, I'm a pocket. They give you some money. They say you owe us more, so you have to get some money from me. Where do I get the money? I get it from them too. So they're just spewing money in all these different directions, making it seem as though the system is solvent because they keep getting paid the interest on their money, but they have to keep inflating the money supply and giving it to people to pay the interest on their money. It's monopoly, right? It's the
Yeah.
game of monopoly where you go around the thing, they give you $200, and then you can pay your income tax.
Yeah. So I think that's so important to dive into, because most people don't quite understand that. I was actually talking to some friends, and I was telling them that the entire system is a Ponzi scheme. It's created to keep you working forever, so that these people that we elect can spend recklessly, and they can keep spending as much money as they want to. The entire system is designed to do that. Everything that we do
I
today is
think
pretty much,
I would just alter the word designed.
of
It's the
course.
consequence of the design of the system is that that's what happened. So it's not, but
Mm,
you may have cause and effect reverse. Like I don't think
you're right.
they
You're
had
right.
all that it was a master plan. It was like, well, we were spending a lot more gold than we were taking in, so we had to devalue the currency. And then at the end of the day, we were way like, who knows what the heck happened to all the gold. So we just said we're not redeeming for gold anymore. And as a result of that, the consequence became, well, governments realized they could spend a little more here, they could spend a little more there. In times of trouble, they could deficit spend extensively and there would just be, the next generation would have to pay the money. It's just interest, so they would keep going. And then people got wise to, oh, there's a great scam here. I can get elected by promising more. And so the system became
Right.
more and more and more corrupted. It wasn't designed to do this, but a weakness of it was that it could be used to do this. And then that
It could
weakness
be
got
corrupted, right?
exploited. And so I think that's why it's taken 70 years to get us to this point where everybody's so cynical about every politician and banker and everything that has become financialized. Like we've lost, like during the COVID crisis, we lost confidence in the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical companies. Why? Because money printing destroyed their rationality, right? It was like, well, the
Yes.
governments are going to pay you $3 trillion to create something you call a vaccine that doesn't actually prevent the disease or prevent its communication and might actually harm people. And the government's going to pay you for it and force people to take it. So obviously all this trust was lost because the money wasn't earned, the value wasn't there, people were terrified, people were scared. And that's just one example, but every time that this financialization, this fiat financialization grows and spreads and overwhelms an industry, it brings with it a complete corruption of the value that it honestly produces. And so we end up with this mixed bag of some industry that was created that was really valuable and producing tremendous value for the human race being completely distorted by the fiat money, the overwhelming introduction of money that isn't earned into it. And then it all becomes confused because a dollar that's earned and a dollar that's faked are indistinguishable from one another. They're completely fungible. You go out and work and somebody pays you dollars for your work and the government prints it up out of thin air and you hold these $2 up, they're identical, right? There's no
Yeah.
way to tell the difference after the fact. So it's all this irrationality blended in with rationality, indistinguishable one from the other on a monetary level. And so it breaks down the meaning of money and the value of money. And that's the lifeblood that informs the decision making in all corporate activity, right? In all economic activity. So all of the world's economic activity is really distorted by this notion of printing money. This is what
Yeah.
Bitcoin fixes at the end of the day. It would have been what gold would have fixed if we were able to return to a gold standard, but we can never, ever return to a gold standard again
I
because
also
it's all
think gold requires custodians, right? So that's a
well,
key. Without
that's another issue, and
yeah,
I think that explains why did the gold standard fail? It was because all the gold got custodied, right? It went
yeah,
through a seizure event, and it ended up getting custodied. And when it all got custodied and put away, and all these paper notes were there, nobody was able to back them up. It was literally the plot of Dumb and Dumber, right? They got the suitcase of money and they spent it and they wrote IOUs. If they had written IOUs for 100 times the amount of money that was in the suitcase, that would actually be the government. The government is like super dumb and super dumber, right? Because they don't just write IOUs for what they had. That's what the paper bills backed by dollars were meant to be. Although these guys were spending the money and never able to bring it back, just like the
yeah,
governments. But the governments then went ahead and said, okay, well, we'll spend $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $30 trillion without any pause. They even turned it into a game. They said, oh, we're only allowed to spend $30 trillion. So the government will come to a stop if we don't authorize spending more, right? We have a debt
yeah,
ceiling or whatever it is. But nobody believes that the debt ceiling is a ceiling. It's just an excuse to pass another bill
yeah,
to say what a great job you did at
yeah.
saving the government from shutting down and giving out money to constituents who you think will now vote for you so you can continue to stay in power. Very broken system.
So do you agree with anything that governments do, or do you
Well, I agree that there's a purpose for government, which is to
yeah,
protect the nation's borders from foreign invaders, implement a system of courts and law enforcement so that the rights of citizens are protected and they're able to resolve without violence disputes, right? Like that's really what we do need government for, and we want to have governments that pass rational laws. Government's job is not to spend money like a drunken sailor on anything and everything that
yeah,
happens, and to promise to make problems go away that they don't have any solutions for. Right? Government's job is not to be the biggest liars and biggest counterfeiters in the nation, but that's what's become. And the more they do that, the less they actually protect borders, which is a big problem. It's the United States elections coming up. The less they do to protect the rights of individuals, and the less effective they are at giving just results to disputes that are resolved without violence through the courts. Again, everything's been financialized in the legal system, and now it's so expensive to litigate anything that many people simply don't, and many other people get away with stuff. Everything's become a mess. So the government needs to rediscover its actual purpose and focus on that, rather than focus on promising to hand out money that they don't actually have, which they then commit the crime of counterfeiting to live up to their promise, if they actually live up to it.
Yeah, I agree with all of what you said. I was actually thinking about something a little bit different. Where you said that they need to protect us from foreign invaders. They need to protect us from just our property rights being violated. All
Yeah.
of this. Do you think that I wrote a tweet on this not too long ago. I don't think you've discussed this topic, but is it possible that governments intentionally don't do those things to make us more reliant on them,
Well,
like with payouts and stuff?
I, when you use the word government and intention, you're presuming that the government is as a singular entity with a singular intent.
Right.
And governments exist at many layers, out of many individuals, with many institutions, and all this kind of stuff. So I do think there are pockets within government that are very cynical. There are pockets that are just incompetent. There are pockets that are trying their best but unable to overcome the brokenness of the system. And there are times when the government is competent. It's not that the government fails at every single thing that it does. It's become so huge. It's over half of the economy now.
Yeah.
And so it's way big. Like, we don't need half of the economy to protect our borders. That's clearly not what's happening, right? They're creating red tape and bureaucracy and paperwork and licensing requirements and all this kind of stuff, none of which is protecting us or adding value. And then they're spending lots and lots of money attempting to provide services that don't fit in that. The healthcare, education, road construction, subway construction. They're so involved in so many industries that it would be impossible for anybody to manage all of these things. So
Yeah.
I don't think that the incompetence is necessarily intended, although you get such incompetence in hiring that it looks like the people at the top of some of these things are actually out to destroy the nation. And it can be that they just have really broken philosophies because they're the product of a broken system. So yes is my answer, but not because they set out to destroy the country. It's like the whole education system becomes an indoctrination camp to justify all sorts of government intervention into everything, the socialist agenda. And then it actually looks to people who aren't socialists like, well, they're really trying to destroy the nation. And every action that they take is destroying the nation. And every time socialism's been tried, it's destroyed the nation. So are these people trying to destroy the nation? I don't think they're trying to destroy the nation. I just don't think that they know any better, and they're products of the system that created them.
So just based on what you just said, I was reminded of something. I was watching this socialist YouTube account just to see what kind of thoughts they have. Maybe they're a little crazy, maybe they're not. But I think some of the things that they say could be reasonable, but then they could be solved with sound money. For example, I think a lot of socialists believe that real estate investing is not real estate investing, just people buying as many houses as they can and then just rent seeking, essentially speculation. Yeah. Of course, that's a problem, and that's what the video was aimed at. But I sent the creator a DM on Twitter, and I got blocked. I told them, "Hey, Bitcoin can actually fix this."
Right. Well, they're not interested. Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Listen, I think it's a great example. Like, and for me, the big criticism on contemporary socialists is they don't zoom out. They look at first order effects and not second, third, fourth order effects. So when you say, if we fix the money, we fix real estate, there isn't that connection. Their problem is there's people with a lot of money, they're buying up houses, and people without a lot of money aren't able to buy houses. So we need to take the money away from the people who have a lot of money, or take the houses away and give them to right. So they want to deal with everything by force, and they don't realize that when you do everything by force, force becomes the instrument by which people start to deal with each other, right? And or appeal to force. So everyone needs to present themselves as a victim. That guy's rich and he has 2 houses and I have none, so give me one of his houses. I mean, this is really well done in Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged. There's a whole episode, the whole chapter in it about the 21st Century Motor Company. Okay, terrific. So if you've read it, there's a whole chapter about how a factory was attempted to be converted into socialism, and really everyone had to earn their money by demonstrating need, because of course the crying creed of socialism is from each to his ability to each to his needs. So you're expected to work as hard as you possibly can, but you don't get paid for that. What you get paid for is your ability to demonstrate need. So the needier you are, the poorer you are, the more you get from the workers. And eventually that discourages the incentive to work and create, and it encourages the incentive to portray oneself as a victim. I think this is what we really see having spread a lot through the current generation, the younger generation, that's really struggling to find income. What they're finding is victimhood, right? They're finding, I'm not able to do this, I'm not able to do that, this isn't fair, that isn't fair, and this is what gives me a claim against government handouts. And so we're getting socialism by default in a lot of these cases, because people don't feel they can go out and earn a living which gives them the necessities and desires of life, right? That's the brokenness of the American dream, or the Canadian dream, or the Western liberal democratic dream right now, that has been broken because a worker's wage is not enough to buy a house, right? So it's not that the socialist is wrong in identifying that there's a problem, but they don't have a workable solution. But why does the world keep falling into socialism over and over, even though it demonstrates its failure each and every time? It's because of the short time horizon thinking and the zoomed in focus, not being able to see the forest for the trees. What creates the incentive for people to build houses? Well, if they can make money building houses. So how do you make it so that people have an incentive to build houses for people who are doing work? Well, you don't do it by getting all sorts of bureaucrats in the way, preventing people from doing this and increasing the cost of everything, so that only people who know how to play the game and have access to the money printer are the ones who are able to buy houses. But that's, that whole education of what is money, where does it come from, why does sound money work and unsound money not work, in a world where there's no examples right now to point to, here's a country that's using sound money and you can see how much wealthier they are. All there is history to look at and say, try to look at how much better off America was in the 1920s, right? Or 10s or 1800s, when, and so you're going back into history that nobody alive has experienced. And I think this is the biggest challenge that we have in persuading people. It's not like, oh, this was better and we need to go back to it. It's like, nobody knows what it was, what it was like. We've only lived under unsound money that's been accelerating its unsoundness. And so people don't see, it's far from obvious what the fix to the problem is. You have to spend a long time studying, and you'll have to figure out all sorts of things that don't exactly work out as expected as you switch to sound money.
Yeah, nobody's lived a life where inflation isn't the norm. That's the
and even more so, like where the government isn't intervening into every industry to fix every problem, right? Where people are solving problems for themselves, where industry is like, you can look at certain industries that have been far less regulated than industries that have been completely regulated. So if you take a look at like the computer industry, wow, has it ever developed quickly? We have Moore's law. We've gone in our lifetimes from, at mine at least, from not even having the internet to then having the internet that was slow, to having the internet that was fast, to having it that it was wireless, to having live video streaming all over the world, and everyone spending all their time on the internet, right? That's what we've seen, as opposed to education, which is monopolized by the government in essentially every country in the world, and nothing's changed. Right? Like, you're sitting, they're still debating, is the right classroom size 27 students or 31 students, back and forth, on this immaterial thing. You still have teachers standing in front of rooms, and it's not a perfect solution. Test scores keep getting worse. Students keep getting dumber and dumber. The system keeps breaking and breaking more and more, and it doesn't have a self-repair mechanism. What you have is, you have unions fighting governments, fighting administrators, but you don't have a free market finding solutions that are solving things. And the truth of the matter is, most of what people are motivated to learn, they learn online right now outside of the socialized, government monopolized school system. That really tells you something about where things, how easy it could be to improve things, and how unimproved they remain while they're completely in the control of a bureaucratic, monopolized regime.
Yeah, and over time, as I think this is pretty easy to see. Like with education, for example, we have people teaching on YouTube. They're posting
Yeah,
videos, and the videos just keep getting better and better and better because they
absolutely.
have an incentive. They have a
Yeah.
reason.
And they're trying to earn just a little bit of money, right? Like most of
Yeah,
these people are, right? So like like we can fix whole industries really, really quickly. There's a learning curve. There's going to be mistakes made in the process, but as opposed to sticking with something that isn't working and getting worse all the time, that's really the tug of war that we find ourselves in with all these industries. Our healthcare system is breaking down, and there's just so many of our systems that are breaking down as we've extended fiat. Fiat is a form of socialism. It's socialized money, and money is a half of every transaction, and so it really is it's a form of socialism that's involved in every single transaction to some degree. And this is not intended to be insulting to socialists. I think we broke capitalism, we broke freedom, and it's very, very hard to see the forest for the trees, as I say. I don't think people can see how people can self-organize, and so they end up falling to, well, we need a leader who can show us the way, who can tell us exactly what to do. And there's no leader who can tell you exactly what to do, right? Like
no,
you have agency, you have self-direction, you have to figure out what to do, and you figuring out what to do with other people who are around you, trying to figure out what they need to do, figure out what needs to get done for the collective group of yourselves. It's not perfect, but oh my goodness, is it ever a lot better than the wild imperfection of one guy sitting in one town, 6 hours drive away, calling all the shots and directing all his soldiers to decide for you without ever having met you or spoken to you what's right for you. Like, that certainly doesn't work, and it never could work. But people, blank out the fact that that's a preposterous attempt to a preposterous idea of how to get things to work, and they keep voting, and wondering, well, this guy made all these promises and they didn't come true. I'm going to vote for that guy now. No, that didn't work, so I'm going to vote for this guy now. It's like that definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's the problem with democracy, right? Like we keep
yeah.
thinking, oh, this guy will bring jobs and and productivity and wealth to us. None of them ever do.
Yeah, just bringing jobs isn't enough. It's about actual jobs that are helping people. Let's
Well, that's why
say,
the government can't create jobs. The government, like when someone says, I'm going to make jobs, that's a lie. Like if you
yeah,
put, how are you going to make jobs? Jobs are made by people who have ideas of doing things for other people. And the other people
yeah,
say, yeah, I want you to do that and I'll pay you for it. That's what a job is. It's not
yeah,
someone in Ottawa or Washington, D.C. or London saying, I'm going to divert $1 billion towards building a battery factory because they think that there's demand for batteries, and then by the time it gets started and all this and all that, everyone's pilfered away all the money that they've set aside, and there's no real jobs left except for what might have been created without any of that intervention to begin with.
yeah. Have you considered how Bitcoin could fix the healthcare system? Is that something that you've thought about at all?
Well,
Is there?
it's the whatever system you're talking about, it's in the same way. It removes the cancer, if we're going to use a
Yeah,
healthcare term, it removes the cancer of intervention and crowding out from the system, right? Right now, you know, there's not enough people getting a certain type of healthcare. So the government says, okay, we're going to throw more money at it. But they don't throw more doctors. Like, it doesn't create more doctors. It doesn't create more nurses. It doesn't create more hospitals. And so what ends up happening is the money tends to get siphoned out by doctors earning more, doctors working less, right? And or some cynical thing taking place that doesn't
yeah,
provide any real value it provides administration. And I think you can see there's charts on the website WTF happened in 1971.com that shows that since 1971, what's happened in the hospitals, as one perfect example, is the number of doctors and nurses has hardly grown. It certainly hasn't grown as fast as the population has grown. So there's fewer doctors and nurses, but the number of administrators has skyrocketed. In fact, the number of administrators who are not providing healthcare in the healthcare industry overwhelms the number of doctors and nurses, of healthcare providers in the healthcare system. And this is all because governments have, like, if someone was running a business providing healthcare, they wouldn't need 5 administrators for every productive employee, right? It's only because all this money is thrown at it and there's not enough incentive to become a doctor. So people become administrators at hospitals and in the healthcare system. And we end up simply spending more money and not getting any more productivity. There's no more doctors to produce the healthcare.
Yeah, there's nobody creating that value that the healthcare system needs to actually continue to making money, to make money, I guess. Yeah, that makes
and
a lot of
technology. Yeah. Anyhow. Yeah. So
No,
so
go ahead with what you're
I think
saying.
whatever industry you're describing, the more intervened it is with dollars not directed by the consumers, but dollars directed by people who aren't consuming, right, by the government, the more distorted it gets. And the more the fix for it simply is get government out of that industry. And the way that Bitcoin fixes it gets the government out of money, right? We separate money from the state, and now the state can't intervene in all these industries, and so they return to a healthy, rational approach. Oh, here you go.
I found the
Both the
graphic.
physicians and administrators, right? So
Yeah.
you can see the red. The red part is the number of physicians, and the yellow line, which explodes in the 90s, the yellow area is the administrators. So now we've got 3,000% growth or something in the number of administrators, and maybe 100% growth. And we've doubled the number of doctors since 1971, and we've got 30 times as many administrators. So 15 to 1 increase in administrators per doctor. Do we need 15 times as many administrators per doctor as we had before? I doubt it, right? It's like,
No.
shouldn't the process of administration should have become even more efficient with the invention and utilization of computer technology in the interim. So what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
And it's the broken money.
It's the broken money. I try to tell my wife that the money fixes everything. It really does. It does.
Yeah.
It fixes everything. There's nothing that money doesn't touch. It's like you said,
Yeah.
50%
Well,
of
broken money has broken everything, right? And so
yes.
fixed money it'll take time, right? Like if you break
Yeah.
a bone, okay, you need to set the bone, but it takes time to heal. And I think we've broken people's perception and understanding of money. We've broken industries with broken money, so the industries are going to take time to heal. Once the money is fixed, like the money isn't fixed yet, right? The invention for fixing money has been discovered and invented and is working its way through the world, but that doesn't mean everybody's using it yet, right? Like Bitcoin
No.
is still like this teeny sliver. So the invention is going to take time, and then it'll overwhelm things and fix the world. And that's this big debate that you have in the Bitcoin community of accelerationists who want to go fast so that we can start fixing the world faster, and the moderates who want a slow, steady transition that's not so disruptive to people's lives. And at the end of the day, the world doesn't care what people want. It's going to deliver what ends up working. If the system collapses and breaks sooner, Bitcoin will become adopted faster. If the system is able to keep itself afloat, that'll be the case. And it may be that the actions of certain individuals or groups of people do cause one or the other of these outcomes to become more likely, but it's not for you or I to decide. We don't get to decide it as individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Or
I
as
think
voters.
that's it. We're just given options, and it's the illusion of choice. It's the illusion that
Well, there's a lot
do.
of illusions of choice.
Yeah.
I think democracy, this notion, there's a big, the election's about to happen at the time that we're recording this in the United States, and people are so pent up over Harris versus Trump. But at the end of the day, you're getting a different set of bad trade-offs in either case. And then in neither case are you getting a fixed world. You're getting some aspect maybe fixed, some aspect made worse, but you're certainly getting more and more money printing, more and more, which is more and more damaging and poisonous to the health of the civilization.
So, Tomer, do you think that you've created videos about hyperbitcoinization, you've created excellent videos. I've actually watched it was a 14-minute video. I watched it a while ago. You were talking about what the world will
Bitcoin is
look like.
generational wealth.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Do you think that the US dollar can survive while Bitcoin is around? The way that I see it, it's either one or the other. You can't have both, because the US dollar is designed to let us delay gratification and get instant gratification at the same time, while
Well,
Bitcoin is the opposite.
yeah, I mean, the US dollar as it is right now, which is this unlimited supply fiat issued currency by politicians, is in an accelerating rate of decline in its purchasing power and its longevity as a result. But the US dollar used to be a promise of gold, right? And so the US dollar, and it's changed, right? Like the US dollar has gone through several metamorphoses. It used to be a claim on gold issued by banks, not central banks, but by banks. Then it became a claim on gold issued by the central bank that became devalued. Then it became a claim on nothing. The notion that it might someday become a claim on Bitcoin is not entirely preposterous. MicroStrategy shares are a claim on Bitcoin, ETFs are a claim on Bitcoin. So paper claims on Bitcoin are not impossible. There's a large contingent of Bitcoiners who would view those things as dangerous because the same thing could happen of inflation of the paper claims, which is very sensible to be afraid of. But the dollar can metamorphosize into something that's sound. Right, the unsound dollar, the fiat dollar, is doomed. Right? It continues to lose purchasing power at an accelerated rate. More and more people are aware of it because of the acceleration of the rate. Like, people's number one concern is inflation, and inflation is going to be hard to beat while governments are inflating the money supply. That's what inflation is. So as long as they can promise to take down inflation, but words are cheap, and if they continue to inflate the money supply, words will become more expensive, like everything else, like eggs and milk and houses and everything else just becomes more expensive. So this fiat system is breaking down right now. And it's broken down in a bunch of different ways over and over, and the crises get bigger, and the fixes for the crisis only are ticking time bombs for future crises. Like the fix for the 2008 financial crisis is the consequence that we're paying the price for it now. So that dollar can't survive, but there might be a transition. I can't tell for sure. There might be a transition where, if the United States, for example, accumulates enough Bitcoin, and then it says, a Satoshi is a penny, right? And we've got the reserve funds, and we're not going to inflate the money supply, and we're going to back it and prove it, then the dollar transforms and becomes a claim on something. But it restricts the government from being able to print more money, because they can only print as much as they have Bitcoin. And if they somehow do that and honor it, then the dollar finds a new life in doing a new, different type of job. And if it doesn't, then it melts away. And I think that's this other really interesting side of Bitcoin, is like, can we actually take money out of the hands of government and have it be completely privatized, and not privatized in the sense of somebody runs it, but it's completely decentralized, completely distributed. Nobody runs it. It just exists, and it runs, and it's contemporary, digital, electronic, in line with the technology that our civilization, that our species uses now, right? This is one of the big problems with gold is it's an ancient technology that is terribly outdated. It's physical, right? Like, how many technologies have remained physical, especially when what the technology is intended to do can be represented digitally. So we're past the point of gold being feasible and usable, and there's also not enough of it. You'd have to pass around dust amounts left, right, and center. It would just all get lost. So it's impractical to expect gold and our modern civilization to work together, which is another challenge to explaining sound money to people. I do think, for a newer generation that's grown up digital, they can understand at least the proposition of the soundness of sound digital money. they'd scoff at the idea of gold. Like, how do I send gold over the internet when I buy something from Amazon? Like, how am I supposed to do that, right? So, and then there's all these people who argue for the digitization of gold, but of course, then it's impossible to prove reserves, and so inflation kicks in again, and you end up with a fiat version of gold, which is no better than a fiat version of nothing, which is what the dollar is.
Yeah. So in your opinion, do you think that the world? I don't personally think so. I don't think the world can ever go back to a gold standard. I think
You
that
can't.
the gold bugs are a
Not
little
unless
crazy.
not unless it regresses
Yeah.
into a digital age, a pre-electronic age, right? And
Yeah.
that's why I think it in part became so easy to remove gold from day-to-day lives, because gold became so inefficient to use in an industrial, electrified, increasingly digital world, right? And now it would be beyond impossible to contemplate it.
Yeah. So I think I know your answer to this. I think I know what you're going to say. Do you think that hyper-Bitcoinization is inevitable?
Well, it depends on your definition again of hyperbitcoinization. Hyperbitcoinization is a term that I think its meaning is changing. Its original meaning was there's going to be an overnight event where you wake up one morning and Bitcoin's gone to $10 million, because every nation state in the world realized that their fiat currency was going to zero, and they printed it to oblivion to buy what Bitcoin they could on the exchanges at the time. That was what hyperbitcoinization meant. I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
Uh, Bitcoinization, on the other hand, where Bitcoin
Bitcoinization.
replaces
Okay.
all the currency of the world, right? Like electrification of our civilization, or the
Yeah.
digitization of our civilization, the internetification of our civilization. None of these things actually happened in a hyper event. We didn't have hyper electrification where one day everybody threw out their candles and bought light bulbs all at once. There is a transition, and almost everything in civilization has a transitionary period. And part of it is building infrastructure, part of it is people wrapping their heads and understanding it, part of it is going through a learning curve of how to use it properly. A lot of people got electrocuted as the world became electrified. Now nobody gets electrocuted, but that wasn't the case always, right? We had to figure out how to ground it and how to insulate it and do all this kind of stuff. So I think every new technology goes through that period. We had fast growth of the internet. Like, it took 20 years after the invention of the browser for us to become largely internetified. And it took 20 years from the invention of the internet to the invention of the World Wide Web and the graphical user interface browser. So these things take time, and there are usually pivotal moments, pivotal inventions that help accelerate things, and then more and more people can see it. So I think that's more likely, in my view, the process that we're going to go through than, there's a BRICS summit going on now, that at the BRICS summit, they're going to say, holy fucking shit, we need to buy Bitcoin now. And they adjourn and they all go out and buy Bitcoin, and the United States catches on and they buy Bitcoin. And somehow we wake up tomorrow and everyone who doesn't have Bitcoin is poor. And everyone who does have Bitcoin is unbelievably wealthy. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's a
No.
chance of it. Even if the BRICS summit has that particular insight, they'll be like, okay, well, how do we start to accumulate it cautiously, slowly, distribute it within our nation so that our economy doesn't stop working when suddenly everybody who has no Bitcoin has no money. So I think it's going to take time.
I completely agree with you. I 100% agree, because I think if you look around, at the people that are even in society today, most people have no idea what Bitcoin is. Most people don't care what
Yeah.
it is. Don't
They've
most
heard
people
they've
most
heard of
people
it, and they have some vague understanding, but it's
Yeah.
usually a misunderstanding that they have.
Yes. Yes, that's it. And what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding that people have about Bitcoin in your conversations with no coiners?
There's a few. I mean, the first is that it's a scam or a Ponzi scheme or
Yeah.
something like that. The second is, if you don't know who created it, you don't know where direction it might go in. But like that that one is. I don't know who created the Earth, but I know what
Yeah.
direction it's going in. Right? It's like a force of nature, but it's a man-made force of nature. So now you start to get into this area that you'd only really even be aware of if you studied it deeply and understood it deeply. And so mostly people have this fear, and it hasn't been adopted yet, so they put it in this chicken and egg dilemma. It's like, well, it hasn't been adopted yet, so it won't be adopted yet. And that's like, Well, that's wrong. That every
Yeah.
technology had to go through an adoption cycle, right? Like you didn't laugh at Steve Jobs the day that he introduced the iPhone and say, well, nobody's bought one yet, so nobody will ever buy an iPhone. Although Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, did laugh at him at that point for that thing, and turned out to be wildly wrong. So we have to go through an adoption curve, an adoption experience, and we have to go through it. So the people who think we don't have to go through it are mistaken, and the people who think we won't go through it are mistaken. We're going to go through it, and it'll take however long it takes.
Yeah, I find it really crazy that people are so strong in their defense of the current system when it's actually a Ponzi scheme, and then they claim that Bitcoin is the Ponzi scheme, and that's just, I
Yeah,
guess,
that's
part
called
that actually,
projection.
yeah, that's exactly it. That it actually just takes us right back to the education, where
Yeah.
people don't understand how money works. People have no
Yes.
idea. They're
Well, to
taught
the
to
people who
believe.
defend the current system, like you can't actually defend the current system rationally. If you start to
No.
think about it, you brought up the videos, right? Like the central bank employees who get asked the question, where does
Yeah.
the money come from? Why do we have to pay taxes? Any of the questions you've asked, and when they try to answer honestly, they end up caught in a logical loop where they see what's wrong with them. So many avoid thinking, but in avoiding thinking, I can't remember whose famous line this is. I want to say it's Mark Twain's, but it may be somebody else's. It's like, it's something of, you can't explain an idea to a man when his income depends on him not understanding it, right? You can't get someone to
Yeah.
understand something that their income depends on them not understanding. So I butchered the quote, but it's that kind of thing. Like people definitely don't want to think about what is existentially dangerous to their source of income. And I mean, I've seen that it's a form of cognitive dissonance. I've seen it hundreds of times in my life, where you're trying to have a conversation with somebody about something that's changing, and you bring up something that's a provable, demonstrable fact, and they're like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. Let's put that. I don't want to talk about that. So they become a victim of reality because they refuse to accept reality. Great Ayn Rand quote, which again I'm going to butcher. It's like, every man is able to evade reality, but no man can evade the consequences of evading reality.
Mm.
Right? You can pretend something doesn't exist, but you can't avoid the consequences that will come to you from pretending that the thing that does exist does not. So yeah,
Yeah.
you've got it there. You can't make somebody understand something if their salary depends on them not understanding it. Upton Sinclair.
So the
There's a
last
few
thing that you said,
variations of that quote, but okay. Yeah.
yeah, but the last thing that you said, where the Ayn Rand quote, where you can act like something's real, but you can't avoid the
You can
negative
evade reality.
consequences.
Yeah, you can
Yes.
try to evade the facts of reality, but you can't evade the consequences of evading the
Yes.
facts of reality.
I think that takes me into crypto. I want to
Okay.
ask you your thoughts. So I actually I had a conversation with somebody who was trying to promote random cryptocurrencies. So there's tons of them. Obviously, there's thousands of them.
Yeah.
People will constantly promote them to you.
There's
So
millions of them.
whenever I have the conversations with them, I ask them, you have this, and this benefit, but do you know the potential opportunity costs? And none of them can tell you. None of them have any idea. So they'll say, "Oh, it can. We need money that can scale on the base layer. What are the opportunity costs of that?" They can't tell you. They have no idea. With Bitcoin, we know exactly what the opportunity cost is because we've studied it. We've studied that if the base layer grows too big, then it becomes more difficult to run a node, and we can explain that so in depth, while these people that are promoting cryptocurrencies, they can't. What's your biggest argument against something like, I don't want to put you on the spot here. What's your biggest argument against something like Ethereum or any
Well,
cryptocurrency?
they're
Do
all
you
the
understand?
same.
They're all the
To
same. Okay, okay.
me, they're not actually decentralized, and they all have leaders as a consequence, right? There's two sides of the same coin, right? And so
Yeah.
I think the first thing that you can see with every one of these altcoins, not every single one, but the overwhelming majority, like 2.9999 million out of the 3 million that exist, there's a leadership team, and they're there, and they've issued themselves a bunch of coins, and they intend to spend them, and they intend to get rich off of their activities by promoting their alleged innovation to you. So they're companies. They're not commodities. They're companies. They're not currencies, and they're not, and therefore they're not money. They're potentially providing a utility. Now, what utility are they claiming to provide? Well, the utility happens to be money. So
Hmm.
so now they've contradicted themselves, and this whole idea of sound money, which is something that nobody is in control of, is lost to them, right? There's all sorts of technical arguments and technical flaws that you can really get caught in the weeds, and most people are not skilled enough in technology, let alone in distributed technology that involves cryptography and and peer-to-peer networking, to even have the discussion. But that's why when I try to explain to people what's the difference between Bitcoin and X, like Ethereum, well, Satoshi went away, never spent any of his coins, and set the thing free to live on its own. Vitalik's still there, writing 4 articles in the last 4 days about how to change Ethereum with the Verge, the Merge, the Scourge, and the Purge. So it's like there's somebody in control there. And the whole point of this thing is like, if somebody's in control and you don't know what they're thinking, then you don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow, let alone 10 years from now, let alone 100 years from now. In Bitcoin, nobody's in charge of it, and it's written in stone. And so you know exactly what it's going to look like tomorrow, 10 years from now, and 100 years from now. So you can plan using it. It's firm, and it's becoming adopted worldwide. So you can see that its adoption is far, far greater than all of the other cryptos combined. So like those things are pretenders to the throne, and they don't actually do what the original thing did, right? So none of them have this this birth process that Bitcoin had, which was the innovation and the decentralization and the abandonment of it by its founder, who never monetized and capitalized on it. So this immaculate conception, people refer to it as, and we're witnessing an immaculate conception of this idea and an immaculate execution of the idea in the process. And none of those other things have it. They're all, many are much more obviously scams and have already failed as the scams that they are. Others keep trying and going on, but it's really pathetic and lame and embarrassing, quite frankly. When I speak to someone who's a strong advocate of a particular coin, I'm embarrassed for them, either in like, you're trying to fool me and I'm too smart to be fooled, so I'm embarrassed for you, or you've been fooled and I'm embarrassed for you.
Yeah. So do you see, so I can see that the way that I see it, they can't be used as money. They don't compete as money. They can't, nothing can compete with Bitcoin. That's the way that I see it. But do you think it's possible that they may have other uses? Could they have, like, for example, I don't know what this even means, to be honest, but somebody said to me that Ethereum is a decentralized internet. I don't know.
Okay, so the fact that you don't know what it means already implies that there's some kind of incredible vagueness. And
Yes.
after 7, 8 years of Ethereum being around and nobody using it to browse anything in a decentralized way, like the internet is decentralized, right? Like it's the websites that aren't decentralized, and
Yeah.
every project that launches on Ethereum is essentially an ICO that issues a token to people who are in control of it and have master keys, which are completely centralized. So it's maybe another decentralized platform on a decentralized platform to issue decentralized websites that nobody uses because everybody's too busy, running the scam of issuing their coins and selling them and then abandoning the project. So it's an ineffective platform for building centralized applications, because there's very successful websites, right, on the internet. There's no successful websites or internet sites on Ethereum. There's only scams that have ripped people off, hit a bubble, and then sold off. So it's what is it? It's if you look at its history, Ethereum is a platform for regulatory escape from committing things that have generally been considered financial crimes.
Can you expand on that? Why
It's
why
like
do you say
people,
that?
during the dot-com bubble, people started all these dot-com companies, but they had to file with the SEC and this and that, and they still all went out of business. In 2017, there were all these ICOs instead of IPOs, initial coin offerings instead of initial IPOs. What does the P stand for in IPOs now?
Public offering.
Public offerings, right? Initial public offerings of stock. But it was the same idea: create these companies that people would speculate on. But all of them turned out to be scams, right? And so there were illegal issuances of securities, right? So that's why I'm saying that it was a platform to try to avoid regulatory intervention into what are generally deemed illegal activities, because issuing things with promises that you'll deliver something when you really just plan on taking people's money and running away with it is generally considered a crime, because there's a victim to it. It's a financial crime because the victims are financially injured by it. So that's the overwhelming majority of what happened on Ethereum. And then people said, when the suckers caught on to that, they came up with a different thing. Oh, we'll issue domain names on it, .eth domain names. You ever been to a .eth site? No, because no browser supports it. Okay, well, so then they issued NFTs on it. Well, what happened to the price of the NFTs? Well, they crashed. And then they did staking. You know, and what happened to the price of Ethereum after they did staking? Then the actual price of Ethereum itself started to crash. So it's one loss. It's an endless series of people putting their capital in and losing it to the first movers. Whereas with Bitcoin, you have more and more people coming in and everybody being a winner, because nobody wants to exit the thing because it's got true utility as money. Yeah. The ICOs had no utility as websites. The .eth domains had no utility as domain names. The NFTs had no utility as actual art. And staking has no utility in turning Ethereum into money, because it isn't money.
I think the one thing, so just this chart, I just randomly brought it up, but the thing that they were saying when they did the merge, the Ethereum 2.0, they went from proof of work to proof of stake. They said that the supply is going to decrease, but now, for some reason, the supply is coming back up.
Right. Well, I mean, Ethereum is a complicated mess of many, many layers, and that's a whole other, like, if you really want to dig into Ethereum, I don't have the mood to dig into it, but I'm sure you can find other people who still enjoy spending time talking about Ethereum. But Ethereum is a really in addition to not being money and being a platform for scams, it's a really complicated technological mess. It's not simple. It's not understandable. You can't wrap your head around it. So you can't make promises about its future behavior. And I guess what you're citing is an example of that. All the engineers and professionals behind it said its supply would decrease, which would, again, make it ultrasound money. But that's not what the idea behind sound money anyways. And now it turns out that whatever's going on there is not doing what they said it would. But that's okay with them, because they'll just change their story, right? That's the life of Ethereum. Ethereum has changed its narrative 10 times since it's been launched. It was internet. It was blockchain 2.0. It was a smart contract platform. It was I can't even remember all the different things it is. And then it was ultrasound money at some point. And it turned out, as long as they could keep changing the the marketing story, they were able to reinvent themselves without ever delivering on their previous promises and the previous marketing stories. But they seem to have run out of steam, right? Like nobody's calling it ultrasound money anymore, but also nobody's got a fancy new name for what it is. What is it? And nobody knows. And so it's Ethereum without a meaning. And there's all these other knockoffs of it that are faster and cheaper and do the same kind of, building short-lived scams on them, meme coins. So I think it's headed for the trash bin, but it'll take time, because it does rest on a technology that's very hard to kill, which is decentralized distributed nodes.
Yeah, I think as long as people are, so there's this guy on Twitter, he says, as long as people are ignorant, the beatings will continue. And I completely agree with that.
People will always be ignorant, right?
Yeah, people will always be ignorant. People always want to make a quick dollar, a quick Satoshi,
and there will always
I guess.
be people who are in the learning process, right? And so people who are learning, if they get teachers or teachers, if they're surrounded by people who want to take advantage of their ignorance, they will be taken advantage of, right? And that's like a good teacher is someone who warns the student of the consequences of doing the stupid thing and shows them how to do the thing smartly, and shows them also how to do the thing stupidly, but with minimal exposure. And the bad teacher is the one who fails to do that and lets, the person suffer the consequences of making bad mistakes.
Absolutely. Hey, Tomer, I found that really interesting. That conversation was awesome. Do you have any, I don't know how much longer you have, but I wanted to ask you, do you have any last words for my audience? Anything that you can share of value?
Listen, well, I don't know exactly who your audience is, but I think in general, the most important thing with Bitcoin is to study it and to find yourself good teachers. There's a wealth of teaching that, I wouldn't go get a formal education from public school, based off of the things that I've said here. If people want, I've got a book you can get for free. It's called Why Bitcoin. It's available on the Swan Bitcoin website, swan.com/why Bitcoin. You can download a free copy. If you like it and you want to get a hard copy, visit my Twitter profile. There's a link to the print-on-demand version of it. I've also got a kid's book out now that you can buy from shamory.com about Satoshi Nakamoto. And the movie that you mentioned, I think, is an interesting thing for people who are really into Bitcoin and trying to understand its future. Not necessarily, it won't explain all of its future, but it'll paint a vision of the future, which you can then do your own homework to figure out if it's valid or not. And that's a movie called Bitcoin is Generational Wealth. So if you just Google it on YouTube, Google it or go to YouTube, Bitcoin is Generational Wealth, you'll find it. And then there's a whole lot of writing that I've done, which you can find at tomerstrolight.medium.com. Lots and lots of articles on Bitcoin there, as well as on the Swan blog. I used to be the editor-in-chief there, so swan.com/blog, and search for Tomer Strolight. You'll find lots of my articles. There's a couple more movies out there too. But that's all I'd say. And study Bitcoin, understand it for yourself. It's meant to be self-sovereign technology. Don't look for a leader to tell you which crypto to choose or which currency to buy. Try to understand money on your own. It's important. If you're working for money, you need to know what you're working for, and you can't really avoid working for money. And isn't it interesting how in the socialized school system they haven't taught you anything about money? That's probably not a mistake. Right. That's the less you know about this, and don't look behind the curtain. The Wizard of Oz, famous line from the Wizard of Oz: "Ignore the man behind the curtain." That's the fiat money system. It is the Wizard of Oz. It's not really a wizard, and he's taking advantage of you, pretending to be someone who cares for you and will take care of you, but he's really taking care of himself.
I think studying it is really what lifts the curtain. And then I haven't personally read your book. I've watched your movies. I mean, they're awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great. I love how you go
you.
into first principles. So if anybody does want to watch Tomer's content, I haven't read if I'm being honest, I haven't read your newsletters, but I mean, based on the videos that you have, you go into first principles, and I think that would definitely help a lot of the people.
So I recommend my book is 27 2-minute chapters. Each chapter is just
Amazing.
a 2-page spread, and they're all like 2 minutes to read, and there's pictures even, so it's not like a whole 2 pages. You have to read, and each one addresses a different question people ask about why Bitcoin. Like, why does it exist? Why is it so difficult to understand? Why does it use energy? Why does it take time and energy to create Bitcoin? So like every article is an answer to that question. It's written in a very accessible way. You don't have to be a technologist, and it kind of gets to some of the spiritual components of what money is and what Bitcoin is spiritually as it gets later and later. And you can read it in whatever order you like. So I definitely recommend. So that's swan.com/why Bitcoin, all one word, like WHYBITCOIN. And you can download a free copy of it. So that's what I'd recommend.
Perfect. So what I'll do is I'll share your Twitter in the description below. Tomer, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us on this show.
My pleasure. All the best.